Good morning from New York City, and a very warm welcome to all our viewers around the world. My name is Sunny Misser, and I will be your host today in this exciting conversation with Sir Mark Moody-Stuart. Let me begin by thanking our host and a few of our sponsors. First of all, I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you to my good friend and the chair of the Accountability in a Sustainable World Conference, Dr. Peter Easton. I would also like to thank the Center for Accounting Research and Education at the University of Notre Dame, the United Nations Environmental Programme, the Finance Initiative, the Climate Action Group in the UK, and the Sustainable Investment Forum in North America. If I were to properly introduce Sir Mark Moody-Stuart, it would probably take the duration of this session. And Mark has threatened me not to do so. So I shall keep it very, very brief. When it comes to the world of boards and governance, there are a few people who strike the right tone at the top, other than Mark Moody-Stuart. He was the former chairman of the Royal Dutch Shell Group, also the former chairman of Anglo-American PLC. Additionally, Mark has also been the chair of the Hermes Equity Ownership Services, as well as the United Nations Global Compact Foundation. Mark has been a former director of Saudi Aramco and a director at HSBC, as well as Accenture. And currently, Mark serves as a board member of Accountability, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome Sir Mark to this discussion. Before I start this discussion, I think it would be very useful to explain a little bit about the context of our discussion. The discussion is, of course, titled Building Better Boards. And while we talk about boards and governance, it seems very appropriate to speak about all that is associated with good governance and building better boards. Corporate boards have, for a very long time, been expected to set a tone at the top. They've been expected to shape the culture, the values, and ultimately the practices of an organization. So in this respect, a director serves as a very vital link between the values of a company and its ultimate business performance. Over the last decade, there has been a lot that has shifted and moved in our business environment. And clearly, the board of tomorrow will have to look, feel, and operate very differently than the board of yesterday. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about this era of board transformation with Sir Mark. And I think, first of all, Sir Mark, a very warm welcome to you, and it's wonderful to see you back. And as I said through this process, we will try to keep this conversation moving. We will talk a little bit about boards and leadership, and then I'll wrap up with a couple of questions of a slightly personal nature. Okay? And I hope Sir Mark will permit me to do that. A very important aspect of boards and good governance is determined by leadership. If you were to look at Sir Mark's career and sum it up into one word, the word excellence does come to mind. And Aristotle had once said that excellence is never an accident. So, Mark, it seems most appropriate for me to begin this question with the question of leadership. And I know it is a very often, very basic, multifaceted, an often misinterpreted question, and sorry to ask you the most difficult question up front. But if you were to describe your leadership style and philosophy over the last several decades, Samak, how would you best explain it to us, all of us, and our audience, sir?
Thank you very much, Sunny. And it's nice to be talking to everybody. Thank you. I think it's difficult question to answer because it varies at different points and different levels in organizations. But if one wanted to sum it up, I would say something like open and consultative covers most of it. When one first joins an organization, one joins a team, and one brings to that team your own skills. In my case, as a geologist, working with geophysicists, with drilling engineers, and so on. One learns from the others and then perhaps gets into a leadership position. And your leadership is based on your partly on your technical competence as well as your human skills. After a while, you go beyond that. In my case, after 10 years in exploration and production, I was heading up the exploration teams in the North Sea. And I was asked to go to Brunei to head up a new part of the organization, which integrated engineering, maintenance, procurement, and logistics, so helicopters, ships, supply boats, etc. And anybody could tell you that I had no skills in any of those. And furthermore, the heads of departments that I joined as their manager were 2 Dutchmen and 1 Scot, and the youngest of whom had joined Shell when I was aged 6. So the question is, what do you then contribute as a leader or as a manager? And the answer is to remove barriers, to find out what the problems are, which you learn from them, because you do not have the skills. They know what the problems are, and to use that to then remove the barriers. And if you then go to a beyond that, to a global organization, the question is how you can enable and release the creativity. No human being is going to have the skills and the genius. Well, some people, certainly there are people at the moment in the present world who think they have, but I personally don't think even they do not, although some of them are pretty smart and have been very successful, although they may be difficult characters to live with. At that level, you are trying to release but channel the creativity. It's not simply letting it go wild. I've looked for analogies for this. I thought of Nelson's captains who he had to dinner before major battles, and they went through the order of battle and what they were going to do, and everybody knew their task. And then in the morning, they acted independently in the confidence that they all knew what everybody's role was. My own personal analogy is when I was a small boy, I used to, in the Caribbean, I used to go riding with my sister, who was rather more adventurous than I was, and she thought I was a bit of a wimp. But riding between the sugarcane fields, sometimes on retired racehorses, if you lifted the reins of the horse, you could feel the explosion of energy. And you had 2 challenges. One was to stay on the horse, and the second was to keep the horse out of the ditch and to stop it breaking its leg or its neck or something else. And so it's how you channel, release and yet channel and prevent destructive promotions within an organization. I think that kind of sums up a number of different things. The only other thing I would say is that it's absolutely vital in that process to be open to consultation within the organization with regular town hall meetings so people can challenge you and you can give them examples. but also externally. We had two bad examples in 1995 in Shell from the Brent Spar Institute failing, which was an environmental problem, and the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa. And in the aftermath of that, we thought we had principles which we'd had since the 70s in Shell, and we stuck to those principles, and they are very good principles. But plainly, something was missing. So we ran workshops all around the world with slices of Shell people, outside opinion formers, and asked them, and our critics, and asked them, what are the responsibilities of a global company in the 20th century going on 21st century? And none of them refused to engage. They said, that's an interesting question. Nobody's asked us before, and we're not sure we know the answer, but we're happy to talk about it. Out of that came some revisions to the principles, quite modest revisions, and we fed those back to them and said to them, how's this? And they said, fine, don't think we can do better than that. But these are just words. So now demonstrate to us with figures that that's what you're actually doing. And that's how in 1997, the first Shell sustainability report occurred. Thank you.
Right. This is extremely helpful, because when you mentioned Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar, perhaps, I still remember his words were very basic and simple. England expects every man to do his duty. And we can, of course, change that to current times. England expects every person to do their duty. But it was very much about disseminating leadership and sharing it, where each person knew their role and their contribution in the overall effort. Mark, forgive me, I don't know the exact year, but I think it was October 21st, because I was born on that day, much later though.
Our eldest son was born on the same day as well.
Well, that's
21st October, 1805. You're quite right.
It's 1805.
The Battle of the Nile is the interesting one as well. Anyway, enough.
Thank you, Mark. One of the key attributes that we have been seeing is around the composition of boards. Besides the usual definition of boards along the lines of race or gender or lifestyle, which seems to be the broad perspective that the Western Hemisphere tends to look at corporate boards, there's a whole host of considerations, such as age, such as experience, such as geographic backgrounds, such as socio-economic backgrounds, and of course, disability. And several of these factors perhaps have not been factored into the composition and the structure of the board. Additionally, we've also seen that as recently as 10 years ago, boards did not have to contend with issues of artificial intelligence or even geopolitics or cyber risks or ESG. And this is becoming more and more routine and commonplace as we move forward. We, of course, at Accountability work very closely with boards and directors, and we have developed a principle set called DIRE, and it basically stands for diversity, independence, refreshment, and expertise. Mark, my question is, when we work with clients on matters of board effectiveness, one of the most common areas of emphasis is being able to define the board of tomorrow. Okay? How can we make sure that we go beyond ticking boxes and build a board that is fit for purpose and that will address the challenges of tomorrow? And that's my question to you. I'm afraid a bit broad, but you can take it anywhere you like, Mark.
Sunny, I think if you're talking about the board of tomorrow, you need to start with the board of today. And to me, that starts with making sure that you have a diversity of experience of people. A board needs, you need a skills matrix. What do you need? You need people with experience in different sectors, in different markets, in aspects of finance, in regional familiarity with major global blocks that you work in, an understanding of how the mentalities, the general mentality of those blocks work. And that's all before, and all needs to be done in 12 people or so, because you don't want too big a board, before you start adding other forms of diversity like gender, etc. So I think you have to go to the absolutely fundamental basic requirements first, and then look at so you're going to need a lot of multitasking. People have to fill more than one slot, and probably people with different skills will come from different backgrounds, and as you say, of different socio-economic backgrounds, nationalities, etc. When you've done that, I think the question is, okay, now if we want the board of the future, what are we missing? What didn't we have before? Well, clearly, social media has become important. Artificial intelligence. You need people who are freshly minted, because no one has a great deal of experience in artificial intelligence, in communication, in a sense, in what you might call the dialogue, the dialect of communication with shareholders and the public. Because over time, this language changes. It's not basic language, but it's kind of dialect. And what might have been perfectly acceptable corporate speak 10 years ago now will look very archaic. So one needs a flexibility. But these are, in my opinion, add-ons. And unless you get the basics right and decide what you need in your skills, and I would add to the challenges of the modern day outrage, because through social media, the ability of small groups of people to whip up real or generated outrage is quite remarkable. And I think how to dodge those bullets before they come at you is extremely important. Things like purpose, which people have talked about. People say, we need a purpose. We've always had a purpose. In my Shell days, the purpose was always completely clear. It was to supply reliable economic energy to people all around the world. And that purpose hasn't changed, but the source of the energy is going to change. People say, well, nowadays, of course, shareholder value is no longer primate in the lead. And I would again go back to the original Shell principles, which were developed in the 70s, where they didn't talk about stakeholders because the word hadn't been invented, but they talked about customers, our people, our neighbors, our shareholders. And the responsibility to the shareholders is, I think, one of the best definitions ever. It is to deliver to our shareholders an acceptable return. In the latest version, it's become a competitive return. We would have had a good discussion about that in my time, but an acceptable return and protect the value of their investment. And that's exactly what a shareholder needs. There's a decent return and don't let the horse go in the ditch.
So Excellent, Mark. What I absolutely love is the simplicity and clarity with which you have described the purpose of Shell that always was and continued through your times. The bit about providing reliable economic energy to the world, and then you quickly added that while the purpose may have remained and continues to remain the same, it is the sources of energy that have changed. And then, yeah, that is, and that's absolutely wonderful. Mark, I need to jump right into the depths of board governance, and this may be a slight difference in style between American corporates and perhaps European ones. But there are two schools of thought about having a single chairman, CEO, president, pope elect, and the other is having an independent chairman or a chairperson with a clear demarcation of duties from that of the role of the chief executive officer. Now, what would you think works best and why?
I think in my opinion, one of the greatest improvements in UK corporate governance came with the report which Sir Adrian Cadbury produced in 1992, with a bit of a follow-up from Sir Ronald Hempel in 1998, on the separation of powers between the chairman and the chief executive and the different roles that each had. I have some first-hand experience in this because Shell, in its slightly archaic structure, which lasted for 100 years, as a joint venture between a Dutch company and a British company, the governing body, each of those companies, 60-40, had their own board according to the national style. So in the Dutch system with continental style, and the UK on the UK system. Those two boards came together in something we called the conference, and the executive committee, I always used to say the closest thing that Shell has to a chief executive is that he had the glorious and slightly Politburo type title of the chairman of the committee of managing directors. And they were managing directors, and the chairman was a chap. Very interesting, because the chairman was the first among equals, not the boss. He's the first among equals. And I think that's the model for a good executive team as well, that the leader is the captain of the team, but is part of the team and can be challenged by the team. In Shell, then, when conference came together, it was chaired by the chairman of the committee of managing directors. So basically, the chief executive, when I was there, had to chair conference, and I came the closest, and it's actually recorded in the Shell official history, the closest I ever came to being fired by suggesting, one, that we merge the two companies, and two, that we adopt an independent chairman, because I was frustrated by the fact that as chairman of the board structure, conference in this case, as chief executive, I could prep the team, but in order to hold the balance of discussion and call on people and be impartial, I had to take off my executive hat on and put on a chairman's hat, which is frankly extremely difficult, if not impossible. So you're much better to separate the two. So I'm an absolutely convinced proponent of the separation. And I know from my experience on the board of Accenture, for example, as a US company with a combined chairman and chief executive, people would say, well, senior independent director, that's that's as good as a chairman. Well, it's not. The
Yes.
senior independent director is not the chairman, and it's a fudge. So I think you should go for the full words.
Well, Mark, that is
And the advantage of doing that is that the relationship, the chairman should know what's going on in the company, have a deep familiarity with the operations, visit the operations, probably have an office in the head office so that he can wander into people's office, but never, ever give an instruction. Just flap your ears. And then you're in a position where, when talking to the chief executive, you both know what you're talking about and you can give some honest advice. And chief executive's job is lonely. They don't have that many people to talk to. And a respected chairman and a chairman with whom you have an open relationship is an extremely important interlocutor.
Undoubtedly, Mark, because you also draw a very nuanced difference between a chairman and an independent lead director or a senior independent lead director. And you call the chair as a captain or a first amongst equals. It is equally interesting how you mentioned that the chairman should have an office at the headquarters. And I remember your office, Mark, because in the 3 decades that I've known you, you probably had one of the smallest offices on the entire floor as the chair, and you literally came and escorted all your visitors back and forth to the elevator. So there was clearly a tone at the top when it comes to chairman. Mark, I'm going to be fairly brisk with my next question, and then because I want to save room for the 2 important personal questions that I have. Your career, Sir Mark, has traveled and you have spanned the globe, literally, in terms of where you've lived, where you've worked, where you've studied, and where you've traveled to. And there is clearly a shift that we're seeing. Geopolitics is impacting our business. And you don't have to look far, but if you look in Europe over the last couple of years, there is a conflict. And that conflict has shaped and affected several aspects of business life. The disruption of supply chains, the access and the cost of energy, the displacement of large groups of people, unemployment, inflation, and not to mention significantly inconsistent monetary policy. Now, this is just to name a few. So geopolitics does have an impact in terms of how businesses choose to operate. Would you, and in fact, we at Accountability have almost called this the new G in ESG, environmental, social, and geopolitics, as to the immense and outsized impact it has in the world of business. Especially in this post-globalization environment, we see this as a crucial component where one has to look and carefully consider risk and uncertainty factors in terms of planning ahead. How can businesses address and to some degree, to the best they can, manage the geopolitics in ESG, and how should the board be thinking about it?
Well, I think you're right. It's a major factor, Sunny, and I would just don't get rid of the first G. So I would have 2 G's in ESG.
2 Gs.
I've always in my career been a strong believer in the role of business to be able to operate to mutual benefit across politically sensitive boundaries. The politics may be difficult, but if it's at all possible, maintaining a business relationship on the basis of balanced contracts, and if they're not balanced, they won't work, is absolutely fundamental and keeps open the human contact. And I've always believed in this, in dealing if you're in a company with a major economic impact, and having to deal with a head of state who may have in their life, heaven forbid, been guilty of major human rights abuses, provided you make your own standards perfectly clear and make sure that the operation that you're running can maintain its own standards. And the area that probably most comes under pressure is employment of nationals. It's provided you can do that, it's beneficial. But it is what I have called dining with the devil. And I think Martin Luther King is alleged to have said, although I've never been able to find his actual quotation, that you have no moral persuasive power with somebody for whom your contempt is obvious. So you have to establish human relationships, respectful human relationships, respecting others' views, even if you fundamentally disagree with them, be prepared to discuss with them. Now, this has become increasingly difficult because of the role of sanctions, financial sanctions, and geopolitical sanctions. And that imposes a kind of bolt from the blue risk that something will explode and a group of companies will declare, often without United Nations support, because I've always been a strong believer when the UN has sanctions, they should absolutely be respected. But I think the use, for example, by the United States of US of dollar sanctions has been much overused and is, of course, having the expected effect that countries such as China are doing their best to wire around and escape from the grips of the dollar. So such a policy eventually carries the seeds of its own destruction, which is a pity. So I don't have, one needs good antennae, and you're back to the skills you need on the board. You need people who can perhaps read the minds and anticipate likely directions of major political blocs.
Thank you, Mark. This is most helpful. You know, as we come to the close of this session, this is the part that all our viewership has been waiting for, Mark. This is the rapid fire round, and it has very little to do, well, maybe some to do with boards and leadership and governance, and a little bit to do perhaps about you on a personal note. So, Mark, I have had the privilege of knowing you for 3 decades, but you've been married for 60 years, almost 60, as you corrected me, a couple of months short of 60 years. You've spent your career with one company, Shell, for 43 years. Can this be regarded as a hallmark of good leadership or stable governance, Mark? And I leave this to you.
Yeah. Sunny, I was asked a similar question 30-something years ago by a financial journalist at the end of an interview. And I said to her, I think it shows persistence in carrying out a strategy. I would say, well, it's persistent. Interestingly, she said, oh, well, we have a saying in the financial industry that never put your money in a company where the CEO is on his third wife. Which, of course, 30 years ago would have been acceptable. Nowadays, that remark would probably not be acceptable.
Very, very well said, Mark. Very well said. Which brings me to my final question of the evening. Mark, you have literally a few seconds to respond to this question. You can take as long. I know you're a person of many interests. You sail, you hike, you play sports, and you're a very active person. If you were to describe one single favorite song of all time in any language that is your personal favorite, which one would it be, Mark, and why?
Well, it would actually be a whole, what they nowadays call vinyl, in those days were called long playing records, by
Yes.
a woman from what was then British Honduras and is now Belize, called Nadia Catous, and she would have been 100. And the album is terrific, and Judy and I and our children have grown up listening to it, and I still play it from time to time. It has some terrific songs. One of my favorite being one called Long Time Boy, I Never See You.
Well,
Come Let We Walk and Talk. The entire song is in the Caribbean vernacular, and
well,
it's beautiful. And Nadia Catous has a lovely voice. I'll disappoint you. You can't get it on Spotify, but you can still buy the vinyls.
well, I look forward to doing that. And as always, Mark, you have something not only of interest but of value. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be here with Sir Mark and span the breadth and the depths of issues that we have covered around boards, around governance, around leadership, and around musical preferences. And of course, not to mention the importance of persistence and carrying strategy through in both professional and, of course, personal life. Um, Mark, I really hope that we can continue this conversation. And once again, I'd like to thank all our organizers. Special thanks to Peter and Laurie and Gemma, because she's the one who's monitoring the entire broadcast. And we're very grateful to all our hosts. So we hope you enjoy this recording and wish you the very best and hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.